Hello and welcome to the Majlis, the podcast by Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, focusing on Central Asia. I am Mohammed Tahir, your host here in Washington, D.C. This week, with the visit by Uzbekistan's Prime Minister, Abdullah Aripov, perhaps we are witnessing a new beginning in the complicated history of bilateral relations between Tashkent and Dushanbe. Aripov's visit will follow a trip by Uzbekistan's newly elected President Shavkat Mirziyoyev, a man who appears to have made building bridges with his immediate neighbors a priority in contrast to the previous president's isolationist approach. With no major problems to put the countries apart, Mirziyoyev's trip to the other three immediate Central Asian neighbors went smooth so far. Now Tajikistan is a different story. Mirziyoyev, in his January 6th speech, has slightly hinted to the complications. Today, on the Majlis, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty Central Asia podcast, we plan to dive deep into the complicated history of these two nations to understand the value of today's development, to examine how far can it go. To discuss these topics, I'm joined by three veteran journalists with background in Central Asia. Joanna Lillis, Central Asia reporter at the EuroAsiaNet. She's based in Almaty. Eda Schlager, freelance reporter based in Central Asia who works for various German media. Bruce Pannier, editor of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty Central Asia blog called Kishlok Awazi. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining the first Majlis in 2018.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much. So let's get the discussion kick off with you, Eda. Recently, you have been to Tajikistan following your footsteps. Mirziyoyev is going soon there. So in your opinion, Eda, how big of a deal is this? What are thinking in Tajikistan?
Yes, as you already said, I've been to Tajikistan at the end of last year, after a break of 2 years, and I have to say I just was in Dushanbe, and as we all know, right, Dushanbe does not reflect the whole country, but nevertheless, I think it's great times ahead for Tajikistan, I think, and people are keen on the new relationship between the two countries. There are some economic changes ahead, I would say. But we don't have to forget political situation in Tajikistan itself, and I think this will have an influence on the relationship with Uzbekistan as well.
Okay. Bruce, Joanna, do you recall when was it last time an Uzbek president visited Tajikistan?
Well, perhaps Bruce can remember exactly when it was, because offhand I can't remember when Karimov was last in Uzbekistan, the former President Karimov was in Tajikistan, which tells you how long ago it was. It was many, many years ago. Bruce, do you recall?
I can't remember exactly that. I do remember that when Uzbekistan joined the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, of course, that's a bigger meeting, that it was in Dushanbe, and he went for that. And that might be the last time he was actually in Dushanbe. And I think the last time that just the two presidents met, Rahman came to Uzbekistan, but it's more than 15 years ago for sure.
Yeah, so certainly it's a big development that's happening. Now, Prime Minister Aripov was there. And what was the outcome of discussion? What they were talking about?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a very interesting couple of days. The news coming out of Dushanbe with the Uzbek Prime Minister visiting Dushanbe to pave the way for this historic visit by President Mirziyoyev. And we've been hearing some very interesting things today. They're not confirmed, but what we're hearing from the Tajik media via a government source, anonymous, is that Uzbekistan and Tajikistan have reached various agreements that really would be groundbreaking. One of them is a visa-free arrangement between the two countries, which really it shouldn't amount to such a big deal, given that most of the countries in the region are already visa-free with each other and with most of the rest of the Soviet Union. Yeah. However, for a number of years, Tajikistan and Uzbekistan have operated a visa policy, and this really is an enormous bureaucratic hurdle for people wishing to visit friends or relatives, and many people have relatives in the two countries, and of course for businessmen and so on. So I think that's something that's going to be welcomed hugely by ordinary people as something that really will make a difference. And we're also hearing from this anonymous government source that they've reached an agreement on one of the most contested bits of the border between the two countries. Again, that's historic. It will be groundbreaking if they can sign a border deal, as Mirziyoyev has done with other countries, including Kyrgyzstan, over very disputed borders. We're hearing that they've reached an agreement on how to manage the Farhad Reservoir, which has been a subject of dispute for years and years and years. And we're hearing that they've reached an agreement on how to jointly manage that, with Uzbekistan managing the facility and Tajikistan the territory around it.
You touched openly at the nature of the disputed border. Maybe, Bruce, we could look into the background of some of these issues to understand the importance of these developments. Could you go back a little bit into the history to explain what has been happening so far?
Sure. You have to kind of go way back into the history of the place. You know, the thing that really started Uzbekistan and Tajikistan off on the wrong course was the Tajik Civil War. You know, the Uzbekistan's reaction to the outbreak of hostilities in Tajikistan was to close the border with Tajikistan immediately. The Uzbek government refused to take any refugees from Tajikistan from the start. However, at the same time, Uzbekistan, Islam Karimov, the former president, he did not want to see any strong presence of an Islamic group anywhere around him. So he offered to send troops to help keep Rahman in power. Offered might be a little flattering of a term. I think he kind of forced Uzbek troops on Rahman, and Uzbek troops were very active at the start of the civil war. They helped get Rahman at least keep him in power, something that Karimov would remind Rahman of years later after the civil war had ended, that Rahman should remember on whose tanks he rode to power, meaning Uzbek tanks. And then after Uzbekistan's troops stopped playing such an open role in the civil war, they were part of a force. It was called a CIS peacekeeping force, but they helped guard border posts along the Afghan border because the Tajik opposition, the Islamic part of the Tajik opposition, was going back and forth between northern Afghanistan and into Tajikistan, and Uzbek troops were part of that. And interestingly, Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan were two other countries. It was a Russian-led group, but later on, by late 95, Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan had scaled their involvement way back to just actually a few officers. Uzbekistan never scaled its troops back. I think they always had at least 1,000 and at times 2,000 troops in Tajikistan, and they kept them there all the way until the end of the war. So when now the war is over, and Karimov figures that Rahman owes him for having sent Uzbek troops in there and helping to keep him in power and everything like that. Rahman had a little bit different interpretation of what was owed, and because Russia had also played a huge role in Tajikistan and during the civil war and guarding the border, Rahman turned to Russia, which further infuriated Karimov because the peace deal had included the Islamic opposition in government, which displeased Karimov a lot. And then at the same time, Rahman preferred to have Russian troops already stationed in his country. He made it clear he would rather have Russian troops in his country and keep them there. And Karimov also didn't want a strong Russian presence in Central Asia because he saw Uzbekistan as being the regional policeman. So, from there, relations they were never going to be good. They got to the point where, of course, we know Uzbekistan sent gas to Tajikistan for a while, but they used to shut the gas off the same way they did to Kyrgyzstan. Whenever Rahman made a decision that displeased the Uzbek government, they would turn the gas off and cite, failure to pay debt for supplies already received. But everyone understood that it was a political move, not a financial move so much. And the two sides just never got along. They harbored each other's enemies at times. A mutinous colonel that tried to overthrow Rahman found sanctuary in Uzbekistan after the civil war. The Islamic movement of Uzbekistan, although the Tajik government didn't want them there, and particularly, they also did not pursue them very aggressively either, and that displeased Tashkent. So that was the situation. The border was closed. The two presidents could barely stand to be in the same room together.
Yeah, yes, Uzbekistan's bilateral relations with Tajikistan is full of complications, full of emotional baggages. Dispute surrounding Tajikistan's plan to build Rogun Dam, an alleged blockade of Tajikistan by Uzbekistan, are two among many other questions. Obviously, the list of grievances is long, as you said, Bruce. But these two issues, let's talk about this a little bit. Especially the Rogun Dam is larger than life for Uzbeks. Somewhat, it became a national pride. So where things are heading surrounding these two fundamental issues, and will Mirziyoyev depart from Uzbekistan's traditional position on these matters? How far can the relations get? We will continue, Majlis, talking about these and many other questions shortly. Hey everyone, before we get into the second part of the show, just a quick reminder that if you really like the Majlis podcast, there's a real chance that you will also like my other radio show that's called Gandhara Podcast. The show discusses latest developments in Pakistan and Afghanistan from local perspective. And the podcast is published in every second week on Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty's Gandhara website. It's a totally must-follow discussion for foreign policy nerds with interest in the region. First, let me recap the debate that today on the Majlis we are discussing a recent rapprochement between Uzbekistan and Tajikistan to understand how far it can get. Joining me in the discussion are Joanna Lilis, Central Asia correspondent at the Eurasia Net based in Almaty, Ida Schlager, freelance reporter based in Central Asia who works for various German media, Bruce Pannier, editor of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty Central Asia blog called Kishlok Owazi. I am Mohammed Tahir, host of the Majlis here in Washington, D.C. Welcome back, colleagues. Now, let's deal with the elephant in the room. Maybe we can start with you, Ida. You were kind of silent in the first half of the discussion. The Rogun Dam. For some reason, this appears to be the root of every dispute that these two countries have. How big of issue is this from Tajikistan's point of view, as you were in Tajikistan recently?
I have to agree with Bruce first. So Bruce told us about all these prejudices, about the expectations from one president against the other, and I have to agree that this is quite present until now. But the expectations from what Tajikistan is expecting from Mirziyoyev are quite high, I have to say. So I met with an official, the vice president of the Institute for Strategic Studies in Dushanbe. And again, he quoted all these claims and that Karimov expected Tajikistan to take him as an older brother. And in the traditional Central Asia way of life, it's so that Tajikistan should do what Uzbekistan will tell them and so on. So this is quite present up to now in the politics. And I think this will make the in Dushanbe quite interesting, I suppose. Rogun, of course, is a huge topic, and I think the whole economic sphere is the most vivid thing I think we can something expect from. The same as for Mirziyoyev, as I would say. So it's another topic, of course, what can we expect from Mirziyoyev, the political opening of Uzbekistan, or more only on the economic side. And I think the same we can discuss for the relationship between Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, because the economic sphere is, I think, a bit easier to discuss for both sides.
Yeah.
And from my recent trip to Dushanbe, I have to say this is really something you can see, something you can feel within the population. So I had the opportunity to visit a car shop where these Ravon cars made in Uzbekistan are sold in Dushanbe. And there is a high interest. They are really made for the middle class, for the Tajik middle class, and they are sold there. There is a high interest in people coming there. And it was quite interesting for me to see how the economic relations are growing right now. And Rogun is, of course, the top of the iceberg, you can say.
Yeah. Let's talk about Uzbekistan's expectation, Bruce or Joanna, whoever wants to jump in here. What Uzbekistan is expecting?
I think it's hard for us to judge exactly what Uzbekistan's stance on Rogun is now. I mean, I don't It's clear that although Uzbekistan has very much under Mirziyoyev softened the really harsh opposition and aggressive talk that used to emanate from Karimov about Rogun, we haven't actually seen an official change of stance on Rogun. We haven't ever seen anything like that. What we have seen is Mirziyoyev softening the rhetoric and perhaps creating a situation in which dialogue is possible. And from that point of view, I think there might be opportunities that Uzbekistan can also benefit economically. And we have seen Mirziyoyev, for example, making noises about cooperating on other hydro projects in Central Asia, and that previously Uzbekistan had so vociferously resisted. So although, as I say, Uzbekistan has not officially dropped its opposition to Rogun. It really has stopped talking so aggressively about it. I mean, Karimov was famous for once suggesting his remarks were interpreted as threatening war over Rogun and other hydropower projects in Central Asia, whereas in fact probably he was really saying that water problems can lead to war in various parts of the world. But it was threatening rhetoric. And Mirziyoyev has really distinguished himself by completely backtracking or backing off from such kind of talk, and this will create, I think, a room for dialogue. And perhaps in this case, in the future, I can see a situation where Uzbekistan might drop its opposition to such projects, including Rogun, especially Rogun, perhaps. But as long as it receives some guarantees about water supplies, which is its main concern as a downstream country, worrying about its water supplies being cut off. So I think if it received guarantees, and if there were almost certainly be international organizations involved, so those guarantees perhaps could be enforced. And I think Uzbekistan potentially see some, maybe economic involvement. But we're looking far down the line here. I mean, we haven't really, it's impossible for Mirziyoyev to visit Italy without Rogun coming up behind the scenes or being a really big elephant in the corner. But we haven't really heard anything in the last couple of days about what might happen during Mirziyoyev's visit in terms of any agreements or statements on Rogun.
Yeah, Bruce, maybe Uzbekistan has more issues to deal with before they get into Rogun Dam, but somehow I think that was kind of a major point in the Tajik-Uzbekistan dispute over the past 2 decades. So what is thinking in Uzbekistan about this topic? What is thinking behind Mirziyoyev is not talking about this issue, at least as aggressively as it used to be in Karimov era?
Well, I think you probably could have stopped at Mirziyoyev not talking about this issue. He has not. I don't ever remember him specifically referring to this. The Rogun issue. When Uzbek Foreign Minister Abdulaziz Kamilov went to Tajikistan and said that Uzbekistan was not against projects that took into consideration rational use of water in the region, Tajik authorities immediately seized on that as meaning that they could build Rogun. Joanna's right. There has been no clear policy articulated by the Mirziyoyev administration about their position on Rogun yet. And I thought it was curious that of all the information coming out from the Aripov meetings in Tajikistan, the mention of Rogun was absent as far as I could tell. I didn't see any reference to that at all. I had heard that was still a sticking point and was part of the reason that Mirziyoyev has visited all the other Central Asian countries but not Tajikistan. So we don't know. That said, when he went to Kyrgyzstan, the Kyrgyz president was the first one to say that Uzbekistan wants to join Kambar-Ata 1. They want to be part of the project, which was another project that Karimov had opposed vehemently. So we don't know. Maybe that's the great surprise announcement when Mirziyoyev shows up in Dushanbe sometime in the spring, is that Uzbekistan not only doesn't object but wants to participate in the project. But like I said, it's kind of ominous that of all the information coming out of Aripov's visit, that, like I said, I didn't see anything about that, which shows that maybe they're not quite on the same page yet.
Earlier, Bruce, we were also talking about the lake, which is located on Tajikistan, but the idea was that it will be administered by Uzbekistan. When we are talking about this rapprochement between these two countries, we also have to remember those long-standing sticking points. What was the story of lake and some other long-standing sticking issues?
That was the Farhad Reservoir, and I think Joanna or Edda made reference to that earlier, that they had come to some strange deal, whereby it's part of it's really on Tajik territory, but Uzbekistan is going to run it. It's kind of similar to the agreement they came to with the Kyrgyz, or at least that was de facto with the situation in Kyrgyzstan with the Ortotakai, Kasansai, whichever one you want to use, which Uzbeks called it, reservoir that was a sticking point for a long time. I think probably the biggest profile thing that came out of this for me anyway, was that Uzbekistan said it would help demine the Tajik border, which is a pretty tall order because some of those mines are way up in the mountains. But I thought, for the Tajik people, I thought that was one of the things that's really going to appeal to them. Those mines have killed, I think today the figure was 76, but I mean, several hundred people have been maimed by these things, and usually they're kids gathering firewood and or shepherds out with their flock and stuff. And so I would think that for the Tajik people, that's probably, besides the fact that certainly the visa-free agreement is a big deal and they can go and see their relatives. But as a gesture of goodwill, I think Uzbekistan raising, the possibility of helping with demining the border is probably something else which will go a long ways toward endearing the new Uzbek government to the Tajik people, and something we shouldn't forget to mention.
Yeah, maybe Eda. There's also a question about the railway road. I think there are strange arrangement of railway tracks between these two countries. What's the story there, and what people are talking about this? I believe in the past they had some disputes, some controversial situations surrounding these tracks.
Yes, so actually I have to say I'm not so in this railway policy, I have to admit, but what I can tell is that people really in Tajikistan are waiting to go to Uzbekistan. So they welcome any change of getting easier to Uzbekistan, be it by railway or by plane or something like this. So they are highly welcoming all changes, what makes the transport between both countries more easy. So this is really what I can tell. But what I would like to focus on a little bit, if you allow me to say this,
sure.
To have a look on the relationship between both countries, you have to see the domestic policy of Tajikistan right now. So actually, I would say, okay, we can discuss why does Uzbekistan not tell anything about Rogun and so on. I would say Tajikistan is in a quite difficult political and economic situation right now. And this would, in my opinion, make it quite easy for Uzbekistan to build up any tendencies for Tajikistan. So I think they will use the moment to build up any ties, to be maybe more polite than they have been in the last years. But I don't think that Uzbekistan will open up so much against Tajikistan that they will talk on one level. I think we have to talk about this as well, because I think Tajikistan highly depends on any support from other countries because of its economic situation. You have the bank problems in the financial sector. You have still the problems of migrant workers. A lot of them return to the country. They still don't have any work. You have a huge population growth in Tajikistan. And these are problems the Tajik government is facing right now. And I think they won't tell any conditions to Uzbekistan. On the other hand, really, it's I think they will wait for any support from Uzbekistan to make it a little bit better, the situation, the domestic situation.
Giovanna, the domestic situation is aside, we have these long-standing issues. To solve those issues, I think there has to be some sort of give and take between these two countries. How do you see discussion proceeding on this?
Do you mean on a new sort of strategic agreement between the two?
Yeah, strategic agreement that should include also the long-standing questions like future of Rogan Dam, water distribution, railway tracks, and all these big topics that these two countries have been facing over the past 2 decades.
I mean, I imagine that part of Aripov's visit to Dushanbe this week has been about drawing up such a sort of strategic deal, because I can't imagine that Mirziyoyev will pay such a landmark visit to Tajikistan after so many years for an Uzbek president to visit without there being some kind of really big document that they want to sign, and that they're going to tout as the latest basis for partnership, and it will be the latest basis for partnership as well. And I do think that most of the things that we've been talking about are going to be covered in such a document. I mean, I'm only assuming that some sort of strategic partnership deal will be signed, but it would seem that such a visit wouldn't go by without one. And I think most of the things we've been talking about will be covered. There's obviously going to be some agreements on trade. I mean, there's been talk today also about removing trade barriers. The government source from Tajikistan has been saying that that's been on the agenda, and removing trade barriers and cutting export tariffs. Uzbekistan has import and export tariffs. Uzbekistan has notoriously high import tariffs, for example, which act as a barrier for Central Asian other countries to export their goods to Uzbekistan. So I think there's probably going to be a whole different sections that are going to be covered, including economic cooperation and transport, the kind of things that you've been talking about, restoring railway links and so on. But there'll also undoubtedly be areas including terrorism and things like that. I think it will be interesting to see whether something like Rogun does make it into such an agreement. And I think we're going back here to what Bruce has just said, which is, Rogun, we haven't heard anything about whether Rogun is going to feature, at least publicly, in any statements or in any agreements, not even from anonymous sources. We've heard nothing on this. So it'll be interesting to see if Rogun does feature. I suspect that if it comes to a sort of strategic pact or partnership deal, it's unlikely to feature such projects by name, and it's more likely to feature some vague commitments to hydropower cooperation or in mutual interest or something like that. But I do think that will be quite a wide-ranging agreement signed, as well as certainly many other agreements on the sidelines. And typically, when Mirziyoyev has been on his trips gallivanting around Central Asia, he's also taken business delegations with him, which is not something Karimov was really known for. And they've always talked of signing, several $1 million worth or more of deals. Of course, many of these don't always come to fruition. They're sort of on the drawing board, and there may be just statements of intent, memoranda of understanding.
Yeah, certainly we see that there is an interest in both sides, as earlier Ida was talking about, from the Tajikistan side, to improve this relationship, with its big neighbor. But also there are lots of long-standing issues. So to understand where this is going in the future, what's the next step Mirziyoyev is going to take?
That's a good one. Him and his administration have been pretty good at improving ties with all the neighbors around him. And of course, I mentioned that he hadn't visited Tajikistan yet. For all the problems that there have been between Uzbek-Tajik relations since independence, and there are many. One time when Karimov actually met with Rahman, and again, I'm thinking this was in the late 90s or something, and Rahman had come to Uzbekistan. I can't remember who was where. But Karimov, in what was probably not a very honest speech, said, Uzbeks and Tajiks are the same people speaking two different languages. And we've heard this kind of stuff before, but that's right. Uzbeks and Tajiks are Sart, and I mean that in the old sense of the word, not what it's come to mean now. Uzbeks and Tajiks are sedentary people of Central Asia. They have more in common with each other than they do with Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, or Turkmen. And they should be natural allies. Unfortunately, the bad relationship, mainly from Karimov's side, but between Karimov and Rahman, really spoiled that for a lot. If you think about how many Uzbeks are living in Tajikistan and how many Tajiks are living in Uzbekistan, it seems amazing. They dress similarly. There's so many things they have in common, that it really is a question of all right, some people speak Tajik and some people speak Uzbek, but really, prior to independence, probably there was all kinds of communities where they spoke both. And it was interchangeable, and there wasn't any problem. So there really shouldn't be any problem in Uzbek-Tajik ties. It really boils down to Karimov and his policies. So this should be fairly easy for Mirziyoyev to resolve. The people have hundreds of years of living together without any issues in the past. So there's certainly a great basis for a good friendship. And I would say, looking at it from the Tajik side, this is something they really need. They need access to their goods outside of the country and to get stuff inside the country. We know that the Kyrgyz-Tajik border is not really any better than it's been in a while, which is to say not good. And so this opens all kinds of opportunities for Tajikistan. I would imagine the Tajik government would be willing to make some pretty serious concessions if it would mean that railway traffic, road traffic, and the ability of their citizens to go back and forth would open up with Uzbekistan. I mean, this is a whole new world for them. Tajikistan cannot trade through Afghanistan. They have a hard time trading through Kyrgyzstan. They can export stuff to China and get stuff back, but those are high mountains, and you're never going to be able to get any serious commerce going through those routes. So it's important for them to have Uzbekistan as a partner with open borders.
Yeah, certainly important. Eda, maybe we could get your take on this. So what does the outcome of Mirziyoyev's efforts with the other neighbors offers any clue about what could be the next step of Mirziyoyev in regard to Tajikistan?
Oh, difficult question for me. As I'm taking more the Tajik position here in this talk, I would say, as I already said, and I completely agree with Bruce in this question, I think Tajikistan is quite open right now to any offers from the Uzbek side. And this is, again, quite positive for Uzbekistan, which is coming with full hands, as I expect. And yes, I think we can only hope for whole Central Asia that there will be a next visit of Mirziyoyev in the near future to Tajikistan, and of course a visit of Rahmon to Tashkent. Actually, I would say we all have these expectations and hopes for Central Asia that the regional politics are getting better. And if now Mirziyoyev is coming to Dushanbe, I think this, it has a lot of opportunities for both countries and for the whole region.
Right. We are almost over the time that we anticipated this discussion to continue. Final point, Joanna, this rapprochement also coming at a time when the trajectory of these two nations are in an opposite direction in many ways, like talk about the political situation and their dealings with the human rights, press, and all these things. Uzbekistan apparently liberalizing, and Tajikistan is very much on the path of, earlier Eda was saying that, Karimovization. But given such a complicated history, the fact that the leaders of these nations are talking is already a big deal. But the question is, how far can it get?
Well, I mean, I think it could get very far. I mean, given that Mirziyoyev has just, in one fell swoop, really abandoned all the hostilities of the Karimov era with neighbors, I think that means it's very positive. I don't think that we should see as a break on relations the idea that Uzbekistan is moving in one direction and Tajikistan in another. For a start, I think that it's clear that Mirziyoyev is on a somewhat slightly liberalizing trajectory, but we shouldn't overestimate that. Uzbekistan is not about to become the next not the next democracy, but a democracy in Central Asia, a trailblazing democracy in Central Asia. Right. Uzbekistan is going to remain an extremely authoritarian state. It's very easy for Mirziyoyev to look like a liberal when he's working from Karimov's base, because right. Uzbekistan was and still is really one of the most authoritarian countries in the world. Right. So I think even from that point of view, I think Mirziyoyev has a lot in common with his neighbors, all of his authoritarian neighbors. They all want the same thing. They all want to stay in power. None of them are going to introduce democracy. They will continue to place restrictions on freedom of speech, etc. So they've all really got a lot in common from that point of view. And I think that what can be positive for the people of Central Asia is that Mirziyoyev's abandonment of Uzbekistan's previous sort of hostilities, verbal at least, that really put a brake on developing as a region or cooperating, not developing perhaps, but cooperating as a region and cooperating bilaterally between Uzbekistan and other states. All that's behind Uzbekistan now, and I think that's really going to be beneficial for the region, and most particularly for ordinary people. And I think that's what's perhaps important here. And I think that improvements in relations with other countries, Uzbekistan and other countries, has already led to improvements in people's lives. Let's take the Fergana Valley open borders between Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan. People very excited and happy about it, and I hope that we'll see the same coming with Tajikistan.
Yeah.
Mohammad, let me just jump in for a minute. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Because I would like to refer to what Joanna said in the first half of this last comment. And you mentioned this so-called Karamidization in Tajikistan. I see this, and I'm quite scared regarding Tajikistan when we look at the as I already mentioned, the domestic situation, because of course they welcome Mirziyoyev right now, but they still love Karimov and his politics in terms of his really authoritarian regime. And unfortunately, I have the impression that Tajikistan is taking Uzbekistan and Karimov as a role model right now in building a similar authoritarian regime in Tajikistan. We all know that the situation of human rights is really deteriorating in Tajikistan right now, and I experienced this. People are not so keen to talk to journalists, not to foreign journalists, of course. Local journalists told me that it's getting worse and worse and much more difficult to talk to people, to talk to governmental sources and so on. So we have to keep this in mind, and one outcome of this meeting right now could really be that Tajikistan gets better instructed, sorry for saying this like this, yes, in worsening the situation of human rights and building up Tajikistan as a more authoritarian regime.
Yeah, but this raises another question. Bruce, perhaps you could answer that. Deteriorating situation, the ones that Ida was indicating, perhaps offers a place for Mirziyoyev to play a positive role in Tajikistan. Mirziyoyev certainly doesn't want a destabilized neighbor, correct?
Oh, yeah, I mean, absolutely. And, that's one thing. There's so many things we could say here that we can't get to all the topics. But security is of course, one of the paramount things when you're talking about what does Uzbekistan get out of this. Well, obviously, better security and intelligence cooperation with Tajikistan, especially given their border with Afghanistan, is a big plus for Uzbekistan. That said, we know that Rahman is getting on in years. She's had an interesting life, which must have been a little bit hard on his physical condition. He seems to be setting his son up to take over, and really this could happen very soon. And so Uzbekistan, I can see where it would be in their interest to have as much information as possible about what the thinking is in the Tajik government with an eye toward the succession, because it might not go very smoothly, and we might see Uzbekistan playing a role in the future similar to that it played in 1992 when it helped to put Rahman in power to begin with. So, there's a lot of good reasons for Uzbekistan to have good ties with the Tajik government, because the succession will have an impact on Uzbekistan's future too, and of course they want to be sure that what impact it has is very soft and very positive, and not a return to chaos and disorder that we saw in 1992 to 1997, which upset not just Uzbekistan but really the whole region. Yes. There's a good reason for interaction with the Tajik government from the Uzbek side.
Yeah, a lot to talk about. But let's continue this discussion in the future. It was a really fascinating discussion. Thank you very much, Bruce Pannier, editor of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, Central Asia, blog Kishlock Awazi. Big thanks goes to Joanna Lillis, Central Asia correspondent at the Eurasia Net, and Ida Schlager, freelance reporter based in Central Asia. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your time and thoughts today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And this is it from me, Mohammed Tahir, host of the Majlis, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, Central Asia podcast. Until next week, bye.